welcome to this legal webinar run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session is going to focus on the child safe standards, but we're going to focus on the incident reporting and risk register. And I'm going to build on some of the questions that actually agencies asked us last week, particularly on, well, how do you actually report on this? What happens if there is an incident that actually occurs? And where do we go to from here? So this really completes a set of webinars that we are running in terms of the risk reporting and reporting requirements. So just to cover off what we did look at last week, and as always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this webinar is being run remotely and also recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the session, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners. So let's just have a look at some of the recaps of what we looked at. Now, I will say that you do all have access to the legal resources that we ran through last week. Now, the legal resources do cover, and I will just jump into this for you just to show you where you can actually access those. So with it, if I just jump to our, and here we go here, Gemba dashboard, all of you should have your login details. If you don't, then we just simply email us and we will send these to you. So let's just have a look at quickly some of the resources that you already have access to. When you jump in, you can see that you'll have the Gemba College, and this covers off specifically, if I just go into there and click on that, that does have the child safe training for volunteers, board members, and also all staff or personnel for employees. And if I just click on that link, what will come up is the set of 3 training resources that you can access. And here we are here. So from here, you can access the one for board members, obviously for all staff and personnel, and also for volunteers. If I just go back to the dashboard and I click on Gemba Docs, then what you do have also access to is a number of key policy areas that we covered off last week under the child safe standards, and these cover the child safe code of conduct and also the reporting, the mandatory reporting policy. And if I click on that, here it is here. You have the policy template that you can use about mandatory reporting. And so you've got access to these particular resources that we walked through last week as well. And just to recap, when you do access them, you can actually edit these particular template requirements as well, because they are in a Word document. So just to briefly run through and recap where we were, what we did cover off, obviously, as I mentioned, was the resource tools, being the learning modules covering off board governance requirements, training for all staff and volunteers, and yourselves can access those along with the policy templates. What we will be looking at specifically today is the incident reporting. Now, if I just go back to the dashboard for you to be able to view, let me just bring this up for us as well. Here we are here, and I'm just going to go back to the dashboard. One of those things that you will see is the risk management button, which allows you to actually access this, being the incident reporting side. So we will just walk you through, and I'll show you what importantly, what other agencies just like yours are actually doing to address and meet all their child safe compliance obligations. So with it, essentially, as we went through last week, certainly there are resources that you can access. We have looked at and we went through the specific quality standards and the guidelines, and also just looking at self-assessment tools and areas for improvement. But also when we look now at incident reporting under the governance standards of the child safe obligations, what is important to actually look at in this particular case is not just the standard themselves. And there were a number of agencies last week that actually raised the question, well, what if we actually are based in one state, but we also provide other services to other areas? Do we also need to look at those particular child safe standards, and how does that work? And in short, the answer is yes. But it also means that when you look at what your governance reporting requirements are under incident reporting, then what we need to focus on is not just the mandatory reporting or identification of child safety issues, but also looking at, well, how does that work in relation to fair work in terms of training your volunteers and staff? How does that then also talk about when we have to deal, unfortunately, with disciplinary action? Is that obviously that's something that might come out of incident involving a child, but also that also means you need to look at what your fair work obligations are if there is disciplinary action required for staff members or volunteers. If it involves board members, then it could also be reporting back to the ACNC as well too. How does this work as well too for your agency? So when we talk of this, who is looking at you, especially in this governance, risk and compliance space, it can get very confusing very, very quickly in terms of what you need to meet now for your incident reporting obligations. So we did look at, in terms of this webinar series and the resources that we're going to provide to you, we also looked at last week the child safe requirements as well, and you can have access, you do have access to this webinar. We also looked at the child safe standards and what the definitions were, and I'm just going to skim through these just to recap where we were. We also looked at the history of where these came from and why the child safe standards are so important, as well as also looking at the Commonwealth standards in terms of the framework. And you'll see here that there were obligations under training and compliance, and also incident reporting and things like working with children checks and the like. We also looked at individual states as well, for example, in Victoria, and what the child safe standards were. We recapped on Queensland and also what their obligations are, along with the different standards and what the expectations were as well too, in terms of even corporal punishment and case management. And we also went through and looked at New South Wales and in terms of the standards there and what the requirements are in terms of benchmarking against agencies. And of course, looking at the 10 child safe standards and comparing those to what we see in Victoria and also Queensland. And then we went through, obviously, the child safe standard obligations and what these actually meant. Now, when we look at places like Queensland, and in terms of the safety obligations, then what we do need to consider now is, well, what about incident reporting? And what do we mean by this? Well, I'm just going to step back for a minute and say, when we look at incident reporting, one of the things we do need to look at is the policies that you have. So two of the policies that we raised was about mandatory reporting and the code of conduct. And when we looked across this for Commonwealth or state government agencies, essentially what we did see was this requirement that you needed to look at, well, your specific policy documents in relation to how you actually incident report and what does this actually involve. Well, when we look at things like child safe policies and incident reporting, then essentially what we do see is this requirement for agencies to meet their particular requirements and also look at, well, what does the policy say about your agency? Now, you'll find that we do have policy templates, and when I come back to this, I'll share what we have. It is around providing safe environments for children. And so when you do look at incident reporting for your agency, it means then that you also do need to cover things like code of conduct, identify what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and what are the boundaries that you need to put in place for staff members, volunteers, and contractors. And other agencies at last week's session actually raised, well, does this actually cover contractors? And the short answer is yes, particularly where they may have contact with your with either children or service providers that you also deal with. So essentially what I'm getting at is setting the definitions very clearly in your policy documents of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Because essentially this is what will guide your incident reporting when you look at, well, what does this actually mean? So when we roll this out to agencies within, similar to yours, some of the things that we did look at was, well, looking at the Child Safe Register, identifying the standards and looking at, well, what are the risks that may occur, and how do you actually empower both children, parents, and the agency community to raise concerns as well too, keeping in mind that some of these may not all be incidents, but there may actually be complaints or feedback that you might have within your agency. So let's actually just have a look at some of the tools that you have. Now, if I go back to our Gemba dashboard, and I'm just going to bring this up for you to see, and here we are here. So again, this is resources that you can use. I'm simply showing you what other agencies have done in order to meet their reporting requirements. So the first thing that I'm going to raise is on the incident report. So let's say there is clearly an incident that involves a child. What do you actually do? Well, essentially what we have got here is an incident report. We've got the name of the person reporting it, who it actually involves as well too, and then we've included students as well too, where it occurred, the different states where it occurred as well too. So if I do pick, for example, I'm based in Victoria, or if I pick Tasmania, then it can accordion out to actually cover your relevant standards in your relevant area. Now, picking up one agency's comment last week, which was, oh, look, we actually work across Queensland, South Australia, and Victoria. Well, essentially, this form does allow you, if you open it up, to click on Queensland, and it'll actually change the form content based on your Queensland standards. So if you do select New South Wales, it'll actually identify the 10 standards and one of those that you need to report on. So essentially, when you go down and complete the form, you've got the date, the time, when things have occurred, what actually happened, and the details of the incident. And some of this list here is a little bit broader than just child safe standards. It does cover off some of the other requirements that you also have. Now, in saying that, once this form is completed, once this form is completed and saved, what it does do for you is automatically create a register entry. And what I mean by this for agencies when you come in, and this is just a template tool that you can access. So I'm not actually showing you anything that you don't actually have access to. It is something that your agency does have access, and you can actually utilize this template. So essentially, once you save it, what it'll give me is the number, the submission date. If I go back to here, it shows me the description, what has happened, and also more importantly, tells me the date and the time of when this has occurred. So essentially, you might already have an incident report that works similar to this, but what we found is that when agencies actually go in, what they can very rapidly do is actually mark and show what incidents have actually occurred and when they've actually reported on it. So very quickly, essentially what you've got is your incident reporting side, and it's something that works across many child safe agencies. Now, if I was to go back and bring up the policy document, and let me bring this up here. Okay, here we are here. And this is a template document, and I can simply click on Enable Editing, and this will allow me to make any changes to the document. It is a Word document, so it's a template that you can use. So essentially, under the mandatory reporting requirements, what we have done for you is pull out the specific areas. So your agency understands the importance of child safety, and it's about protecting the physical, sexual, family violence, emotional abuse, neglect, and grooming of children. And very clearly, this is reflected in the incident report. So if there is a staff member identifying that there is abuse or wanting to report against it, you're reporting against these 6 particular reportable areas. What it also means is, what is the process then for actually running the report? So essentially, the CEO or Child Safe Register nominated person gets notified out of the system. So essentially, your CEO can get reported immediately about it. And what they then do is step through this process of identifying, well, what is the process to meet your legal obligation? Obviously, doing things like reporting to the board. And if it is confirmed that there has been a grooming, for example, or one of these 6 criteria have met, well, what is the child protection process to ensure that the child is actually kept out of harm's way? This process, let me be very clear, is actually inbuilt into the form. So the policy itself will actually reflect what your incident reporting form is given in your particular state. So essentially, when you look at your incident reporting, and if I go back to my slides as well too, essentially the incident reporting allows you to very quickly keep a register and a record of any incident that is being raised. And if there is any concerns being raised, then you've got the ability to actually go into the incident form itself and actually add comment about what has been done and when. So if I go back to the form, and let me just do this for you as well too. So I'm going back to the form, I'm clicking on risk management, looking at the incident form, and actually going through it and saying, right, this person has completed the form, but now what we're actually going to do is actually look at debriefing. Has that occurred? What's the action to prevent reoccurrence? And what was the completion action date? Now you'll see that we've got help bars on the bottom left-hand corner here. So if you need any questions, if you have any questions, not need any questions, if you have any questions on this and need support, then our legal compliance team is here to support you on this as well. And this also means for any of your staff. So that essentially is the notification of incident side. Now, one of the other areas that we are going to look at is also the risk reporting side, the risk register. So the risk register is this button down here. And if I click on this, what essentially comes up, and I'm just going to summarize this down for you. You can see this here. And each of the standards that you have is listed in here. So if you're based in South Australia, you'll see the South Australian standards. If you're listed in Tassie, you'll see the Tassie. If you're listed in New South Wales, you'll see the New South Wales 10 standards. And out of this, it actually asks you to work. So it's basically a workflow form. It asks you to look at what is the standard, what do you need to look at, what is the risk that your agency can't meet this, and if so, how are you going to address it? Now, you can actually create workflows out of this. I've just shown this is a cybersecurity threat. But essentially what it does do is allow you to work through each of the standards, mark in what you're doing, and actually review this from year to year. This has worked incredibly well for agencies where they've said, right, we need to actually review the different standards. Now, there was a couple of agencies, as I said, last week that raised, well, what if we actually work across multiple states? Well, simply those can be loaded in, and what it allows you to do is to look at them all together. So rather than looking at, let's say, there are some standards that do overlap between New South Wales and Victoria, well, this will actually bring those together for you. So you're actually reporting on the one entry for multiple standards. You'll also see that if you needed to actually run a board report for this, and here it is here, you can very quickly just simply go, right, I'm going to run a board report, click on generate, I'm going to do this in live time, and you can very quickly actually run this report straight out. And here it is here, it is now generated. So this allows you to actually run your board report. Oops, excuse me, this is an Adobe Reader. Here it is here, and essentially it's now come out of what we need to do and or what we have done and when. And I can send this now off directly to the board to use. So as you can see, as part of this, the tools that we've got are the tools that are really tried and tested for you. It is not something that we're saying, look, you do have a single seat to use Gemba, and it is there for yourselves to be able to access as well too. So as part of this, what we are saying is key things to remember is that essentially with this, have a look at the incident reporting form. It is a big part of the child safe standards, and it is a key part to actually managing and monitoring risks within your agency. As part of that, we will open all of this out for your agencies over the next day, and we will be in touch with all attendees within close of business tomorrow as well too. If you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them and stay online. If you are watching this recording after today's live session and do have any questions, then by all means, please reach out to us on either our 1300 number or email us. But of course, you can also reach out to us directly on our Gemba dashboard as well too by simply going to gemba360.com. You can see that big blue circle right here for you as well too, and it is available on our website as well. And I do encourage you to actually use the support desk as well. We will be sending you out copies of today's webinars and the resources as well too within the next 24 hours. But as I mentioned, if you are watching this recording after today's live session and do have any questions, then by all means, please reach out to us on either our website, our chat bar here at Kaizen Synergy, or of course on our 1300 360